courtesy of Publishing Secrets, a Clubhouse club brought to you by Fruition Publishing Concierge Services, a division of Alicia Brown, LLC.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Lounge radio show, where we expose the myths of entrepreneurship and release the weight of it all. Real people, real issues, and real talk with expert solutions. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we welcome our host, Alicia Brown, the Joy Guru.
This is Alicia Brown, the Joy Guru, and I am the CEO of Fruition Publishing Concierge Services, where we take your book from vision to fruition. And I'm excited that you're here tonight in the Clubhouse Publishing Secrets Club. And I do have with me special guest Maria Roberts. So excited to share her story, especially as we're talking tonight about how much should you reveal in your book. I know when I published and wrote my first book, sometimes all you have is happy. That's actually the one that resulted in the business where I could resign from my position and be 100% self-employed. It talked about my story of child abuse and how you can transition successfully from, just surviving to thriving. So a lot of us have decided that once we feel like we're no longer prisoners of our past, we're passionate. We want to share our message with those we think that need it. But the number one questions I normally get from clients, the number one question is, how much can I share, especially since other people are involved? I see that Saudia White joined us. Last week, we had an amazing discussion with her that you now can find on the Entrepreneur's Lounge podcast. So you can go to thejoyguru.net/podcast, and you can hear that discussion we had with her. Because the fact is, she also wrote a book that dealt with real life stories, generational survivors. So this is perfect for tonight's topic. How much can you share? How much should you reveal in your book? Because when you're writing memoirs or biographies, or you're talking about your life, there's other people involved. So tonight we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how you can avoid the risk of being sued. And we're going to answer some of those concerns as I bring up one of Fruition Publishing Concierge Services recently published and best-selling authors, Maria Roberts. So Maria, thank you for joining us this evening, and please let us know who you are.
Well, good evening. Thank you for having me. I am, of course, Maria Roberts, also known as the Hope Dealer. I'm the author of My Downward Spiral to Freedom, Amazon best-selling book. I'm also a minister. I'm an ordained minister, and I have a great opportunity, not only as author, but as caregiver. I'm the full-time caregiver for my mom. So actually, I have been thinking about writing this book for years. Years. And the pandemic hit, and I found myself bored, nothing to do. And one of my leaders always said, "You have a book in you. You have a book in you. You have a book in you." And I said, well, what better time to start writing this book than during the pandemic?
And there's a lot of people like that. So I hope that's the first thing you understood, that when we're at this time of the pandemic, like I said earlier today, the world is on pause. Or the world was on pause. Now we see where we're getting back and trying to have some sense of normalcy. But, that's some of the things you can do in a time where people are stressed and things like that. Really reevaluate some of those dreams and goals you had. A lot of people, it was true when writing a book. So now they have more time. So what do you do with that? So you decided during the pandemic, as it already been spoken over you several times, that there was a book in you. So you decided to talk about your book. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to go into that because I want to give the disclaimer that I am not a lawyer. So I always encourage people in my courses, coaching sessions, on our media brands, such as podcasts or any of that, you always need to consult legal counsel on anything we share with you and do what is best for your business. And if you are an author or pursuing being a published author, you're a business owner, whether you realize that or not. So now you have to put yourself in the position of a business owner and understand legalities and things like that, seeking legal advice, because It really is important, and it really can put you in harm's way if you don't understand that. And I want to emphasize that the best memoirs, the best true stories told, they're open, they're honest about the life of that person or the characters, even if it's difficult for them to write about it. And as an author, you have an obligation to tell the story to the best of your memory and honor the truth. And part of that obligation brings in that business side is you want to consider the impact of those on those in your real life and as well as yourself, and then make the effort to protect them as best you can. I'm not telling you don't tell certain facts or you have to hide and water down things. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm also saying you have to give some consideration about how it impacts others. So up until this point, I didn't say the full name of your book, Maria, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that. Tell us what My Downward Spiral to Freedom is all about.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. My downward spiral to freedom is my journey from addiction to freedom. I actually became addicted to crack cocaine and took a 10-year journey doing whatever I had to do to get one more. So this book is that journey, the actual what I had to do to get one more, the people involved. And like Alicia said, because it is a story wherein I used other people, I had to be very careful. And I didn't mention names, but I did tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, if I was dealing with, in my book, I have described the person by their truck, Mr. White Truck or Mr. Benz,
Mm-hmm.
as to not say the actual name or, different little tricks that I did use to do that. But if anyone that I did deal with during that time read the book, they would know that that was them.
Right.
So I took that risk because I wanted to be totally transparent.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that that was so very important. So I did go ahead and take the risk of sharing honestly. And I must say the published version of this book, I did cut back just a bit the actual acts I performed because my journey did involve prostitution. So when I first wrote it, I was very detailed. But after I read it, I said, well, I don't have to be that detailed to get the point across. So that's the only thing I cut back just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I did, a lot of people that have read it said that they went right on the journey with me and that they were doing everything I was doing because I very vividly explained everything that I had to do to get one more before I actually found freedom from addiction.
Mm. And so you've heard some of the tips that she said she used, and we'll go into the legalities of that because those are things you want to consider. But I hope what you really heard in that is the fact that she didn't water it down. You have to tell the truth. You do have the ability to determine how much you share, how much you don't, and how you share it. But you're not trying to get, I don't want any message conveyed this evening that you have to water it down or you have to tell half truths. Because again, part of, doing a memoir, part of telling a real life story is you're telling the truth. There's a reason behind this. And I love, when I read the book description and if you've seen the book trailer, it says, growing up, Maria Roberts had many dreams and aspirations. As a child, she dreamed of being a princess, living in a big castle. As a young adult, she aspired to become a supermodel and travel the world. She attended college with the ambition of working in the juvenile justice field. Never in her wildest dreams did she imagine the journey that life would take her on. Being the middle child of a school teacher and small business owner, Maria never yearned to be a drug addict. And I love that because in just that description alone, you made yourself so personable. And what I mean by that, too often when people hear that someone had a life of addiction, they try to dehumanize them when really you should understand or you should be open to hearing the journey. How did they go from this to to there. And I said, when you first submitted your book to us, I felt that it was necessary for first the story to be told, but I also felt it was a conversation piece. It was a way to bridge that gap for, family members that have been affected, whether it was your children or your mother or, whatever your relationships were that were fractured by that time. It was an important conversation piece for people to read and see the experiences, not just what they remember, but you're telling your story. So we could, oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't see it that way. So you could really give life and breathe life into what it was like for you to go through that, but also what it was like for you to come out on the other side. Because too often in society, people just don't understand. And I don't understand how they started here and they got to here. And I don't understand why they can't just quit. I mean, sometimes they've been to recovery several times. Why doesn't it just work? But until you actually talk to the person or other people who have been on that path, you really can't understand. So I feel like books like these are so necessary because it humanizes the person that went through it. It gives you graphic detail. It gives you a different perspective to think. And then it can be used as a conversation piece in your community. Maybe it's not your family member that's been affected. Maybe it's a church member. Or maybe in school, there are things you see in with a person or a faculty member on the job. This is a great conversation piece that begins with you just for understanding and empathy. But sometimes it can lead into a conversation with that person so you can have further understanding and move forward. What are your thoughts about that, Maria, as far as what was your inspiration to write it?
Absolutely. My children were definitely on my mind. But one thing I can say about after I released the book, because I can say that after I first read it, I had to put it away.
Yeah.
Because I was like, no, this is too much. I can't possibly expose all of this to the world, but not just to the world, but to my children.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was very transparent in telling, not to go all the way into detail of the acts I performed, but to let everyone know there were acts performed. It was a painstaking sacrifice on my part. Reliving that journey gave me nightmares. It was like I had to keep my focus on the fact that I wanted to give hope to not just those who are in active addiction, but to the family members.
Mm-hmm.
And my first feedback when my book was released just on Kindle Fire, a young lady that used to work for me purchased the book, and I didn't know her story, and she didn't know my story. But she gave me my very first feedback and saying that her parents were in addiction, and it had been a sore subject for her for years, and she didn't know how to talk about the abandonment she felt. But after reading my book, how she could see that at some point her parents were using against their will, and though they may have wanted to come home, the hold of addiction had a grip on them that they couldn't shake. And now that they are clean, she can understand why they were gone and why it took so long, because she read my downward spiral to freedom. So she said that the next time that she was in a conversation with her parents, her empathy level is on a whole different genre, and that she wouldn't be so critical of them, but more empathetic with them. And she was so grateful that I did share my story the way I shared it, because that made her understand that mommy and daddy just didn't leave me because they didn't love me. They were sick. They were very sick. And though they may have wanted to come home, the powerful hold of addiction is something that you can't just break. You do need God to intervene.
Now that right there just gives me chills. Because, especially in the pandemic, can you just imagine? Some people cannot imagine what people that are having recovery issues or even in a recovery program, they're working on their recovery, what the pandemic did to that. You know, a lot of resources aren't as available as they used to be. And the worst thing you need if you're going through addiction or you're trying to seek help for anything is have a disruption in services. So if ever there was a time to have empathy, especially with the additional stressors that have been brought from a pandemic, it's now. So this is like the perfect commercial for when people ask me, how do you pick the books that you're going to publish? It's stories like these that need to be told because it's bigger than just the story. It's the reader that needs to read this. It's not just the person in recovery that needed this story. They're benefiting too, because of course, we all love to read books where we feel like, oh my goodness, someone put into words what I experienced. Somebody else understands me. I'm not alone. But also it was the family members. It was other people working with these people in recovery in the community that you never seem to understand. This gave you a different viewpoint and made it clearer as that first testimonial, as the person said. And, you know, these are dialogues. I think about children and parents. These are things they need to understand. And no one's going to put that in languaging other than the person that went through it. So I love that. I love hearing that. So you have to read the book yourself. And of course, we're going to give you all the information on how you get there. I'm going to say it right now, just in case someone has to leave before we get there. You can go, of course, to our website, fruitionpublishing.com, but I encourage you to get the autograph copy from the author. And for that, you can go to thehopedealer.net. Make sure you visit thehopedealer.net, not just for information only to purchase the autograph copy, but where you can get all of her social media handles and you can continue to follow her on with the journey. So from what you've heard so far, and I'm not going to have her give away the whole story, but if we understand the story, it's raw and real. It involved drug transactions, different people she used with, people that were impacted. And of course, she already told you different acts and things she had to do along the journey to get her drugs. There's no way you're going to do that without getting gritty and personal on some of those things. So that bring in the legalities. And again, I can't stress enough, I am not a lawyer. And I would say anything that we spike your attention or any areas of concern, make sure you do follow up with the attorney that can give you the best guidance for obeying the rules and regulations of your city, state, and your country of provenance. So some people will say, well, Alicia, there's a thing called freedom of speech, the First Amendment. So I can go ahead and say what I want. I don't have a problem. Well, the First Amendment does protect your right to free speech, which does include the spoken and written word. But two areas of concern for authors in reference to that would be the invasion of privacy and defamation. I'll repeat that one more time. The First Amendment protects your right to free speech, which includes the spoken and written word. But two areas of concerns for authors is invasion of privacy and defamation. Okay? And this is why I can't stress enough. You should not write and publish your book alone without the assistance of others. And even if you decide to go with a publisher, a publishing consultant, or anyone similar, you need to know what is their expertise in this area. I've seen a lot of people say they're publishers, as we talked about last week, and they're not. Or if they are, they really don't have a good understanding of the industry. And that not understanding can put you in hot water. I've seen different things when we've had to acquire a client and take over, you know, the work and get their legal rights back. I've seen examples of trademark infringement and libel and things like that. So this is very important. So when we come to defamation and invasion of privacy, here are the facts. Defamation is when you ruin a person's reputation. Black's Law Dictionary defines defamation as taking from one's reputation. You're injuring their character, their fame, or reputation by making false and malicious statements. That covers libel in the written and slander with what you speak. Now, only living people can sue you for defamation. So if you're writing about someone, in my case, my father abused me and he's deceased, especially by the time I wrote the story. My grandfather was abusive and he's deceased. So if I'm writing something and I mention about abuse from them or what have you, their living relatives, including my mother, cannot sue me. However, what you need to know, because that doesn't mean, well, if somebody I'm writing about, they're dead, so honey, I can let it rip. That's not what that means. Because when we get to invasion of privacy, that lawsuit will hinge on public disclosure of private facts. And private facts are sensitive information that the average person would not want to share with the general public. They include things like maybe their medical records or, alcoholism, abuse, things like that. So just as with defamation, an invasion of privacy suit also cannot be brought upon their relatives. So we all know, as I say a lot of times, ignorance is no excuse to the law. It's important that you have an understanding of the things I'm about to share, because if you don't know and you do them, it's very well that your best lesson to learn them would be your suit. Okay. So we talk about writing truth. That's very important. Because if you're going to write something, and as Maria's story talks about, she was writing the truth. She wrote about things that actually happened to her. So sometimes when you're looking at some of these legal cases, one of your ways of protection is just writing the truth. You can't just make blatant statements about people that are not true. Some people feel like, well, if I say, in my opinion, before or after the statement I made, then it's okay. Not necessarily. And I'll share that with you shortly. The best defense against defamation, like I said, is to tell the truth. So let's say, for example, you're babysitter. You're talking about a babysitter in your book, and they were convicted as a sex offender. That neighbor, that babysitter, they can't sue you for defamation, because if he or she was a convicted sex offender. But if you write, my neighbor is capable of being a sex offender because he or she acts like a pervert, then that's a defamation issue, because they were not convicted. You're just saying that, they creep me out and I think they're a sex offender. That can bring a legal issue. So as a rule of thumb, if what you're saying is not a fact, if it cannot hold true in the court of law, then you probably should leave that out of your book, and definitely don't say that verbally. In general, before you write something, you want to check the facts. And even this is especially true when you're writing things that talk about your life, because sometimes families for generation will say things and share it and pass it along, and we accept it as true. We don't know any different. That's something your grandma told you, and her mama told her, and so auntie said this. And then if you really fact checked it, none of that is true. It's been, I think they call it old wives' tale. It's just been passed on. The rumor mill, we always accept it as true. A lot of the people that shared it with you thought it was true because that's what someone told them. But if you really were able to fact check that, none of it was true. So always fact check the things you're saying as well as what you're writing. I talked about earlier, and this is tip 2 when it comes to defamation. People think that if I say in my opinion, they're legally protected. But based on my research, opinions are usually, I want to emphasize, usually legally considered protected expression. But there's parameters for even that. You can't, as I said earlier, you can't just say in my opinion. Like, if I said, in my opinion, Miss Applesauce is a prostitute, when we all know that that person is an upstanding professional person, and you're not telling the truth, that is not going to be supported. So again, if you don't know it's true, it's best to just not say that. The third tip when you want to avoid defamation in any area of concern is change the identifying information about your book characters. Maria already told you some things that she did as far as that's concerned. So, make sure you know first. Be careful with that. Change the names. Like she said, I changed it where it was the white truck or the Benz, and that was the name of the character. That can help. Change the things around. And the bottom line is, truthfully, if you can't defend the truth in court, then you probably shouldn't say it, and you probably shouldn't publish it. It reminds me of that line in TV and movies back in the day. They used to say, the names and faces have been changed to protect the innocent. And in recent years, they would say all characters appearing in this work are fictitious. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Well, half the time that wasn't true. They knew it's about real people, but they just used certain disclaimers to try to legally protect them. But truthfully, when it comes to defamation, if one could reasonably identify themselves through their actions in your book, like let's say their clothing or quotes they said, their physical appearance, their address, or any number of identifying factors, they can claim defamation. So let's say if I say it's my ex-husband, well, that's just a matter of research for who your husband was. So if it's not true, don't write it. Other areas, if you're on the fence about it or there's some concern, you may want to check with legal counsel to make sure it's okay for you to publish that. And then, real briefly, talking about invasion of privacy. All of that was just defamation, but a lot of times the legal counsel, the legal advice is pretty much the same. Invasion of privacy, just like defamation, is decided on a case-by-case basis. So the individual facts of each case will decide what the outcome is from the judge in that court. Certain private facts, which a person would not want shared with the public, can be considered invasion of privacy. I'm going to give you an example because it can be a fine line. If you have a good friend that was given up for adoption and you were the only person that she told, then if you write a book and disclose that in your memoir, that opens the doors to invasion of privacy lawsuit. The same will apply if you gave sensitive information such as their private health matters, abuse, addiction, or any information that would not be readily accessible to the public. Now, certain public or high profile individuals may have less protection against invasion of privacy, because one could argue where their life is so public anyway and open to public scrutiny that the bar is kind of lowered for them when it comes to privacy protection. So if there are unsavory facts that are, public interest, then you may be able to disclose certain things because they're already out there. But what would be the deciding factor a lot of times would be whether your facts are related to a matter of public concern. What are the tips when it comes to avoiding invasion of privacy? Number one would be to get written permission from the characters, because once you have written consent, they can't file a lawsuit against you later stating that you breached your privacy. And that's why one thing as publishers, any reputable publisher, a lot of times we get co-authors or we get people that may want to share, like, one of the books we're working on now, there's a doctor, because it's a health topic. There's a doctor that wrote the foreword and she's saying certain things. One of the first things we did was we went, when we were acquired, we got them to sign a statement of release. There are other co-authors in the book. There were certain co-authors agreements that had to be signed, because what you don't want is later on people saying, oh, well, you didn't get my permission to put that in the book. It's harder to prove verbal versus having a written contract where, yeah, we did get your permission and this is what you submitted. Also, sometimes going back to, we said truth to facts, sometimes people will say things and give you information, and unfortunately, they stole that from someone else. We see that a lot in this internet age where you can just Google something, and now they took a fact, they pull off Google, they presented themselves as, this is my research, this is my whatever, and they have no rights to that. Well, you didn't know that. That's why it's standard when it comes to publishing. There are certain agreements in different situations that are best practices, industry practices to be completed before you publish anything, before you put things out for marketing, promotions, any of that. So again, there's a lot of things you can do by yourself, but writing a book should not be one of them. So when you're looking at this invasion of privacy, again, one of the things that can be helpful, especially depending on how you're presenting people in your book, is to get their written permission. Tip number two, just like with defamation, change all the identifying characteristics, as Maria talked about. You might give that character a different name, different job, different wardrobe, anything you can change to prevent them from being recognized by your words will afford a certain degree of protection. Tip three, as we already said, you tell the truth. Don't embellish. If it's unethical, you don't want to do it. If it can get you in legal hot water, then don't do it. That's why you shouldn't lie or embellish anything. Tip four, and this is the last one, you always carefully weigh the impact of disclosing inflammatory, sensitive, or embarrassing information. Ask yourself this question: is what I plan to share essential to the story? If it is, then proceed with caution and be careful. However, If you're sort of on the fence, then you want to seek legal counsel before you publish. Because writing and being a published author, as I said earlier, it is a business. And you have to decide whether paying for a few hours of that lawyer's time is worth you avoiding a lawsuit. And if you're in business, you know the answer to that is absolutely. So I can confidently say with Maria Roberts' book, she's good on all points. I'm very thorough in those areas, and it sounded like so was she. A lot of people feel that controversy creates cash, especially in this age of reality television. But it's important for you as an author to think about your reputation. How do you want to be perceived, not just now, but as you continue on in this journey with your author's platform and future works to come? You want to put your best foot forward, but you also want to be considered a credible, upstanding, professional person than just some shady, questionable character that's just out here and make a quick buck. And there's no low that you won't go to if you think it would sell the book or increase your sales. So, as we're ending, I do want to applaud you, Maria, for having the courage to tell your story, because I know it isn't always easy. And I want to thank you for shining that light on recovery, because we all need hope, love, and understanding. And there are so many people who are struggling, and those around them don't understand. They don't understand why you can't just break the addiction and stop this. But when they read My Downward Spiral to Freedom, I think it really shines a light that will be able to bridge a gap in that understanding. It can open up a real dialogue, and it even has tips and resources for recovery. And that is so important. So at this time, I'm going to turn the floor back to you. I want you to share with us any last thoughts, any advice, as well as how our listeners will be able to connect with you and purchase copies of your book.
Again, thank you so much, Alicia. I'm just really grateful that I did go ahead and publish the book. I'm grateful because I've had numerous speaking engagements, even in church settings where it was taboo to talk about addiction. I've been asked to speak on addiction and enlighten people, that drug addiction and a drug addict looks like me. It's not just that person that everyone wants to put a face to addiction that is not their next door neighbor or their sister or themselves. It can happen to anyone. I wasn't raised in a bad neighborhood. I was a middle class kid, but I just decided to try something that took me on this downward spiral. But, to go from that to the freedom that I found is enormous. I'm really grateful that I chose you, Alicia, as my publisher, because we have embarked on many avenues since the book. And if anyone is interested in purchasing, the autographed copy of my book is available on thehopedealer.net. The regular copy is available there as well, but the autographed copy is available on thehopedealer.net. To my surprise, the book went to number one seller not number one, but bestseller on Amazon in a matter of hours. And I think that is because of the pandemic and people looking for recovery material. So it is an Amazon best-selling book. And I'm just grateful that I went ahead and wrote it. And I was so very careful about other people's names. And so I decided to just describe them in a way that it could be anyone. So, I didn't want to leave anything out. So I just used description instead of names. And it worked out good for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about positioning, because I shared a little bit with everyone last week of some of the methods that you use for positioning and marketing. So if you guys didn't hear that, make sure you go to the podcast, thejoyguru.net/podcast. That is the episode where we did have Saudia White featured, but we also had Maria on as well. So you can hear the recording and the notes for that. But the most important thing, when we even talk about the book being a bestseller, was it a bestseller in the categories that deal with you? Because there's a lot of tricks and tips that people use to hit number one or hit the bestseller list. But you want to not only have those book sales, but you want to make sure your book is positioned where the people that need your story actually read it And that's what is making it a bestseller, actually purchase it. So, if I chose like taxidermy, well, if you had two people buy it, yeah, you could be number one. But are those the people that are really, is it in categories and being recognized, or people that really would read it? No. So, you want things to be positioned well. And then, as we always say, you want to already be prepared for what's after. How do you continue this journey? Because this isn't going away. There's always, unfortunately, going to be someone that's in recovery. So this is like one of those timeless stories that will always need a voice, especially the voice of someone that transitioned to the other side and who is thriving, but can go back and speak on that. So again, we're just so proud of Maria Roberts and My Downward Spiral to Freedom. We're proud of the hope that it offers. And as she said, you can follow her at thehopedealer.net. That has more information. You can get the autographed copies. It has the link to where you can buy them. It is available online where books are sold everywhere. So wherever you go and buy your books, you will be able to purchase this book. But we definitely want to thank you for just sharing. Fruition Publishing Concierge Services is all about the books that people need to read. So we're very much about helping others bring their book and their author's platform from vision to fruition. So you can always connect with me at thejoyguru.net, because I am Alicia Brown, the Joy Guru, as well as the CEO of Fruition Publishing. So for all things publishing, you can visit fruitionpublishing.com. So with that, we thank everyone that was here tonight. If you have any questions you think of after, of course, you can go at either one of our websites and ask us questions. And every Wednesday, we are committed to being on Clubhouse, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So until next time, bye-bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Entrepreneur's Lounge, where we expose the myths of entrepreneurship and release the weight of it all. Real people, real issues, and real talk with expert solutions. Make sure you stay tuned to our Facebook page and thejoyguru.net for show updates, announcements, and to learn how you can be a guest on our show.